as far as ACL goes, if it's a non-contact ACL, there's a lot of factors that go into non-contact ACLs. Number one would be, some guys are just genetically predisposed to having a higher rate of injury than other players. There are players that are just more rigidly built, and that's the difference between having, a Lamborghini, or let me put it this way, it's the difference between an F-350 pickup truck and a Toyota Tacoma, the old taco truck, or a Lamborghini versus a Corvette or a Camaro RS, So genetically, there are things, the way the joint stability is anatomically, and how strong the connective tissues are, and how you preach about flexibility all the time, but there are young men and young women who are hypermobile, and it doesn't matter how much you strengthen the musculature around the joint, they're predisposed to injury. Our head trainer, Jack Marucci, used to say they got bad protoplasm, which is, that's just the phrase that he attached to it. We had players that were constantly injured, and they trained just as hard as the other players did, and who never got injured. And then as far as ACL, I think a high degree of eccentric strength and explosive eccentric strength, explosive isometric strength are important. And that can be developed bilaterally and unilaterally. Unilateral, jumping and landing is important, begin bilaterally and then go unilaterally. So a lot of jumping to develop the explosive isometric and explosive eccentric strength and isometric strength that's required for stopping and sticking your foot in the ground. And then that's pretty much for ACLs, and I think weak hamstrings play a role, the way the femur can shift on the tibial plateau. I think with strong quads, strong VMOs, a strong patella, rigid patella, like a dense patella tendon and quad tendon musculature, a hamstring strength is critical, I think, and isometric hamstring strength and explosive isometric hamstring strength is important for ACL. And then proper movement skills that I think are developed by playing basketball and doing different things in baseball and football when kids are young. Part of that developmental process of playing a lot of different sports helps to develop that in the most formative years, that, players that possess that type of ability and strength and musculature as they grow older, it's a lot harder to develop it, than it is when they're young. Triple jumpers, long jumpers, high jumpers, all of that stuff that kids do at an early age. In fact, Laird Hamilton, the world champion, the greatest surfer of all time, wrote a book. And in the book, he said, the size of an athlete's engine, and I'm paraphrasing, the size of an athlete's engine is developed when they're young. And same with their musculature. So I think that would help. Then I think for hamstring health, and this is something that I've, being not off work, but not having the day-to-day demands of a collegiate strength coach and department head now has allowed me to really dive into a lot of the stuff. I think that the thing that you can do for hamstring strength, and you got to strengthen the hamstring, you got to strengthen it with knee dominant exercises, hip dominant exercises. You but got to strengthen it both eccentrically and isometrically. So strengthening the hamstrings and having a good balance between ham, quad, and your gastroc and musculature is important. Glute strength is important. Core strength is important. Again, the deceleration work is important for hamstring health. But then I think you need to be able to balance the amount of high velocity sprinting that you're doing. And I think there is a sweet spot in distance per week that has to be done on a year-round basis. So you could work your tail off and make sure you're getting the proper amount of sprinting during the off season. And then when football practice starts, if they're long, drawn out, slow, wallowing, sachet type practices that some coaches are into, without the proper high speed distance, then you're going to end up, your players are going to digress and end up getting injured during the season. So I think in a nutshell, ACLs, those things are tough, man. And you got to make sure that the musculature around it is well developed. All the different strength qualities are developed, and then the movement patterns, the acceleration, deceleration, both, at all angles are done properly. And then practice organization is done. You monitor the fatigue. So you raise their resilience to injury, but then you also have to monitor the fatigue factor, because guys get hurt when they're tired.